Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Motive, Social Motivation for the Creative Class. I am your host, Tim Fulton, here with the director of the Wexner Center for the Arts, Sherri Geldin. Sherri, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Excellent.
We used to work together.
We did. I actually worked for Tim for a really long time. And then I did. Tim taught me everything that I'm supposed to know about being young, hip, and media savvy. And since he's been gone, I've, fallen off the wagon a little bit, but I'm trying hard to get back.
It's why we got you here.
Exactly. I learned about Viber last weekend, and some of my staff didn't even know about Viber. I was so impressed with myself.
Fiverr? Is that what you're
No,
doing?
Viber. It's the latest new social media something.
I don't know about Viber, I don't think.
Well, that's about all I can tell you. Is that
I was confused. I was like, is she talking about Fiverr or Grindr? And I assumed that it wasn't Grindr.
No.
Do you know about Grindr?
Not Grindr, not Tinder, not any of those things.
She does know about Grindr. She has made it clear. Where were you before the Wexner Center?
I was in Los Angeles, California.
Born and raised.
Born and raised, exactly. In a suburb of Los Angeles that probably was something like growing up in a suburb of Columbus back then, like way back then. I could tell you what suburb it was, you would laugh. It was Burbank, California. Made famous by none other than a program that all of you are too young to know anything about called Laugh-In. One of the first kind of hip comedy wannabe with it programs.
I'm familiar with Laugh-In.
I don't know why.
I haven't watched it, in its first airings ever.
I'm not talking.
It's fine. So you were in Los Angeles. You have a master. You have an MBA.
I do, but I don't like to admit it, actually. It made me nervous. I was one of those arts people, I got a bachelor's degree in art history, and back in the day, we all thought, the people over across campus at the business school were kind of nerdy and buttoned up and buttoned down and too many bows and briefcases, and we were wearing jeans and really hip things.
That's crazy.
It's really crazy. But I ended up, after getting a degree in art history and working for a little while at an architecture school, thinking that, I could become a professor and teach art history, but I kind of like, being in the world a little more. And so a friend of mine persuaded me to check out this program at UCLA that was an arts management program. And the good news is that out of a class of 200 people, there were about 18 of us so-called arts managers who had no idea what was going on in class most of the time. We had come from theater, dance, music, art history, film, opera, and they had come from economics and political science and accounting. And so we raised our hands and asked really dumb questions every day, but everyone else found us to be the comic relief. And we were the only ones, I'm sorry to say, in the whole school with even an ounce of style. So we hung out together and had a good time and got one another through statistics and finance.
And so you made it through that.
Barely.
And then your sort of where you put your stake in the ground before the Wexner Center was?
It was kind of a non-existent institution, actually. I was finishing up my last quarter as it was at the time, and I read a little article in the LA Times about a mayor's committee that had been created to explore the idea of a modern and contemporary art museum in Los Angeles. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I want to work there. But there was no museum and there was no there. But I got through my finals and I wrote a letter to the guy who had been named in the article, who I didn't know. And never thought I'd hear from him again, but I got a phone call, and one thing and another, and I was invited to join the committee, because at the time, actually having both a degree in one of the fine arts and a degree in business was something really unusual.
I think it's fair to say that it still is.
It's a little more common now, but it's true. Back then it was very, very rare. Anyway, one thing and another, and I literally became the first staff member of the institution, now known as the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. And I was there for some years as the associate director, and then got recruited to come to Columbus, Ohio, which I had to find on the map because I wasn't sure where it was. And, you know, I'm a coastal snob, what can I say? But I've come to really love this place, and I'm still here.
So you came to Columbus, you had to find it on the map to get here. Thankfully there was a pilot to get you here as well.
Well, there was a pilot, but the truth is, no sooner did I sign the dotted line than the non-stop flight on US Air between LA and Columbus discontinued. And I should have known right then and there it was a sign. And it's taken 20...
What was the sign? The sign was, you can never go home again.
Go home again. No, I literally thought I had clicked my heels 3 times and landed under the house instead of...
And yet, you didn't.
No, well...
So what was it about, I assume the institution, that convinced you to come? What about the Wexner Center?
You know, it's interesting. There were several things about the Wexner Center. When I was being interviewed, the Wexner Center was 4 years old. And when I think back now, although at the time I wasn't really aware of this, I think I was always interested in sort of startups. So literally when I was in college, I worked for a guy who was just trying, you know, to kind of spread his wings in real estate development. And that was just part-time to get me through school. Then I worked for an architecture school in Los Angeles, actually Santa Monica, that was a kind of radical hotbed of dispossessed professors from Cal Poly Pomona. And so that was a startup. And then MoCA was really a startup because there wasn't even a table. I sat at a secretarial desk at a law firm for a year and watched MoCA grow by the number of manila file folders. And then I was interviewed by the Wex, which I had admittedly heard of. It kind of burst on the scene among contemporary arts institutions nationally as this bold experiment. You know, who the hell? They hired Peter Eisenman in Columbus, Ohio on a, you know, land-grant university campus. It was all, you know, quite sort of mysterious and at the same time radical as hell. So, and actually the first exhibitions at the Wexner Center borrowed some work from the permanent collection at MoCA. So, and I always had something for architecture. I worked with Frank Gehry on what was called the Temporary Contemporary, which was the first kind of presumably temporary but still existing facility in LA, and then with Arata Isazaki in what was his first building in the United States, and of course he subsequently came and did COSI, which I had nothing to do with, but nonetheless encountered him here again. So it was that kind of startup thing, but I think what really intrigued me was the idea at that time, and still quite unique for an institution to be equally committed to performing arts, to visual arts, architecture and design, film and video, and to make the kind of commitment that it had to artist residencies and the creation and production of new work, as well as the kind of presentation and education and, you know, interpretation. So, the
Wexner Center, if I'm correct, has a staff of roughly 70, 75 full-time equivalents.
Yep.
You, at the helm of that ship, what is your day-to-day role? What I'm getting at is, what do people not know about your job, and what you know, how do you steer that ship?
The secret sauce. Actually, what you don't know will hurt you, and so I'm not going to tell you. Every day is so different. What can I say? Some days it's more about shaping programs. Some days it's more about outreach. Some days it's about finance. Some days it's about, like, what are we going to do to get the millennials, the young and the restless? And then they come up with this ridiculous idea to send me, like one of the oldest people there, to talk to Tim at Motive. No, seriously, every day is different. We are part of the Ohio State University, so some days I do nothing but think about how to slay the beast called OSU football. Some days
or how to work, well, let's be fair, how to work hand in hand with it as well. While I was still there, we had an exhibition called Targets that was the art of sport. And there are ways to sort of to marry those things. There are a whole lot of Saturdays in the fall that you guys should just be closed.
No. Okay, here's the other thing I do. I worry about statistics, and so, if somebody wants to come to the Wexner Center to go to the bathroom on the way to the football stadium, I count them. We are never going to be closed on football Saturdays. Are you kidding me?
Because the annual report at the end of the year has a number of visitors to the building.
Actually, it doesn't.
And the university.
No, it's more because I decided early on if I couldn't beat them, I was going to join them. And so we advertise our exhibitions on the scoreboard sometime or in the football program. And we've had some fun collaborations with the different athletic directors over the years. My favorite ever is probably the first one when we brought Roy Lichtenstein's exhibition. It was a retrospective that had been organized by the Guggenheim. And it was just a few years after I arrived, but I knew the show was in the works and worked to bring it here. But my brainstorm was sitting kind of between two of my trustees at a football game, which is not something I would typically do on a Saturday, but it was a trustee invitation, so of course I did it. But like always, I couldn't find the football on the field. I didn't know what was going on. But I was sort of fixated on the scoreboard, which back then was the one with the little bulbs in it. It's like before most of you were born. So it all lit up with these little bulbs. And I thought, Roy, that's Roy. It's the pop art Ben-Day dots. And so I asked him if he would mind if we tried to program the scoreboard.
To reproduce the work.
And he came and loved it. He was such a good soul. May he rest in peace. He died way too young.
Can you talk about sort of how, at least when I was at the Wex, my first day was the opening of the Warhol exhibition. I was there for Leibovitz. How do shows like that come to the Wexner Center? How does that happen? I think we've talked a little bit in the past of, that timeline is 4 years, is that right? From inception to getting there? Or, excuse me, in a perfect world.
In a perfect world, it would be 3 or 4 years, but typically it's more like 1 or 2, and sometimes not even 1. Every single show is kind of a different evolution and trajectory. So some of them we conceive and organize, and among those shows are shows like, for example, the Luke Toyman show or the Mark Bradford show that we then send out into the world to institutions around the country and internationally as well. Sometimes shows are offered to us in the same way that we send shows out, so do other institutions, and so we have a chance to look at an array of proposals and decide whether we think they fit with mission and sequencing and dynamics, and you want to have a kind of a balance, but also a kind of rhythm to the overall program, whether it's in film or in performing arts or in the galleries. And then sometimes we learn about them and they haven't been offered to us, and in fact they might not even be destined for travel by their organizing institutions, and we just get really aggressive and go after them.
That sounds like a segue to me.
It does.
Let's talk about the current show.
Okay.
No Purifoy, Junk Dada.
Yeah.
Just what's the elevator pitch on that show, and what is the show?
The elevator pitch, I hope we're in like a 100-story building, because it's kind of a long pitch, but I'll try and keep it to
It's a fast elevator
60 floors. So Noah Purifoy is an artist who, thanks to the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, which organized the show in 2015, is one of those characters who has been long underappreciated, not on the national and international radar, not necessarily part of the canon. Son of sharecroppers, went to school in Cleveland actually to do social work, moved to Los Angeles, found himself, I think the first African-American going to school at what was then the Chenard Art Institute, now CalArts. Found himself in LA during and in the aftermath of the Watts Rebellion in the mid-60s. But apart from that, was already kind of inclined to think about the trajectory of making art that was sort of Duchamp to Dada to Rauschenberg. In other words, found objects, chance kinds of intersections of materials, and Rauschenberg's combines, which would take all sorts of different things and combine them in an assemblage or a combine that had multiple layers, both aesthetically and layers of meaning, and particularly of relations to the political, socio-economic moment. And Noah Purifoy was a genius at doing that and spent some 30 years in Los Angeles making art. He also ran the Watts Towers Art Center, which is this iconic, amazing kind of junk sculpture by Simon Rodia in downtown LA, actually in Watts. And also served on the California Arts Council, which I think was the occasion when I met him years and years ago. He's no longer alive. In the late 80s, he moved out to Joshua Tree, where he created acres and acres of art. So if you think about Storm King, which is the more manicured sculpture garden in New York, which features some of the major mid-20th century artists and beyond, it is diametrically opposite. This is a place that was created by this artist who made these enormous, enormous sculptures and installations, and really sort of lived and breathed and made his work and put it into the world. And much of that work is still there and one can see it, but the smaller works and things that are mobile are now in our galleries, and they look spectacular.
And it's important to note that the larger works are represented by some fantastic large-scale photographs, reproductions.
The really nice thing is that the chair of the Purifoy Foundation, who is the recently retired dean of the School of the Arts at UC Irvine, came for the opening. And I have to say, and I know this sounds self-serving, but the truth is, the show looks better at the Wexner Center than it did in its home venue. He had tears in his eyes when he walked through the galleries. And, those are the moments you live for. You live for giving artists opportunities to do things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. You live for those moments when you see someone in front of a work or sitting in the audience experiencing a dance or a theater work or watching a film, and that kind of spark of sort of intuition, connection, the aha moment. You live for the moment when you know in some tiny way you've changed somebody's life.
Thank you for your time tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sherri Geldin.